Hello, I'm Dr. John Burke. I'm Superintendent of Schools in Hayesville, and I wanted you all to know that the health and safety of our staff and students is of the utmost importance as we've moved forward with our opening of schools for this fall. On Monday, July 27th, the Board of Education met to discuss reopening school options. Taking into account the health and safety of staff and students, the Board of Education approved the following. School will not start until after Labor Day. A detailed safety and operational procedure will be implemented to keep staff and students safe. Parents will be able to choose between 3 learning options. These are traditional face-to-face in school buildings, a remote option for teaching and learning over the internet, or a hybrid of these first 2 options. We realize that family circumstances can change and that we will allow parents to change from one option to the other if the one they chose the first time doesn't work out for them. All of these options are dependent upon the number of positive cases of COVID-19 we have in the county. If the number of positive COVID-19 cases continues to rise, Board of Education or the county may mandate a remote learning model only. We will be following the state's guidelines regarding wearing masks, social distancing, and frequent hand washing. These are 3 simple methods that we can use to reduce the number of positive cases of COVID-19. Assistant Superintendent for Learning Services, Jennifer Reed, will explain the teaching and learning options in more detail. Following her remarks, Assistant Superintendent for Business and Finance, Dr. Clint Schutte, will review our operational details. Jennifer?
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Here is our plan to return to learn. First of all, the Board of Education approved our new calendar, so we'll be excited to welcome students back in either an on-site capacity, a remote capacity, or a little bit of both on September 10th. So you can kind of get an idea here that we will be starting after Labor Day. A little heads up on some classroom and school district-wide guidelines that we're making available, but building principals, as they get back on their contract next week, will be making more detailed suggestions based off of these guidelines. So in the secondary level, we will not be having usage of general hallway lockers. So students will have all of their items in a backpack for the secondary levels. Now we will have lockers for gym lockers, and those will be arranged by the building. We will have assigned seating in all classrooms, and that will be to help with our contact tracing with Sedgwick County Health Department. So there will be assigned seats. Those classrooms that have any kind of flexible seating that has fabric items such as couches or futons or fabric that are on top of the milk cartons, those are going to need to be removed because they're not easily disinfected. So we're asking teachers to remove any fabric items from their room, and we will replace those items with tables and chairs so that we make sure students have adequate seating in each classroom. And of course, this is all just temporary to minimize contamination and spread. So no class-wide manipulative usage. Students will need to have their own individual manipulatives, and teachers will know that and make accommodations. Water fountains, unless they are water bottle fillers, will be shut down, again, for contamination and spread, but we have ordered more water bottle fill stations for each building, and those will be available to use by students, so students will be encouraged to bring their water bottles to school. We will not have any shared school supplies this year, so all students will need to provide their own school supplies, and we will have some that we can provide for students that can't afford them. Computer labs, we will still have those at the elementary and middle levels. Students will just wash their hands or sanitize before they enter, and then they will wash their hands and sanitize when they leave. And then those computer labs will be disinfected each night. We still want students to have access to library books, so checkout will happen in the library, but their return bins will sit for 72 hours before those library books can be back in circulation. That will also include classroom books and classroom libraries. So we will have bins where books can sit for 72 hours before students can check them out again. And also we will be temporarily suspending the use of therapy animals. We do have some great professional development opportunities for our staff coming up. Actually, today we're starting middle school Chrome Camp. Our middle schools have gone 6 through 8, 1-to-1. So all of our middle school students will have a device next year, and we're training teachers currently as we speak on how to make maximum use of those devices. We will also have new teacher orientation coming up the last week in August, so we can meet our new teachers and train them on the way we do things in Hayesville. And then, of course, with the board approved calendar, we have provided extra professional development days for our staff so we can be ready to teach your students and welcome them and start building those relationships just as soon as they start school. So our reopening decision, like Dr. Burke said, came down to 3 options. We could do all on-site, all remote, or we could give you the choice. And our option was choice. We want you guys to have the option to send your kids back to school on-site if you feel that you would like them to attend at the school level. And then you will have the other option to learn remotely if you would like to have your students learn with the computer. And you will also have the choice to send your students on site for those elective classes that may not be offered remotely. We will not be holding open house this year. That may look a little bit different, and parent-teacher conferences will also look different this year, but more details to that will come later. So when we look at the learning guidelines, your on-site choice, if your students are coming back to school on-site, they must abide by the state and health department and district guidelines, and that includes wearing a mask when you are in the building. We will not be switching classes for elementary. They will still have the opportunity to go to specials, but some elementary schools switch classes for flexible level grouping, and we will not be doing that this year. Centers and stations will be modified to prevent contamination and spread. And then we're working with elective classes right now to figure out how we can safely hold those elective classes on site for your students, and also how they would be held remotely if possible. Our special education requirements have not changed, and services will be provided in accordance with the student's IEP. So we will still have those meetings, and your students will get those services still provided. If you choose the remote option for students, our learning platform is Otis, and Otis is an amazing one-stop shop that you can have all of your children on and have teachers communicate back and forth with your kids. It's going to be a much more robust option than it was for continuous learning, and we're excited to roll that out to families. When we do in-person meetings, we're still going to use Google Meet because all of our students have a Google Meet account, and so that will be the easiest way and the safest way for students to meet with teachers. And then Dr. Schutte will talk more about lunches, but lunches will not look as the same as they have in the past. We're going to allow principals to determine how that's going to look in each building. So moving on, this is kind of a nice chart to tell you the difference between continuous learning, what we did in the spring, and remote learning, what we're going to do in the fall. I'm going to focus more on the remote learning side so you guys will know what to expect. So with remote learning for the fall and the future, daily attendance will be taken. All learning measures will be graded just as it has in previous years. We'll be teaching new skills daily. Assignment turn-in will be required and graded. You will have daily contact by a teacher. Now, those of you that have secondary students, you may not have daily contact for all 8 teachers, but you will have daily contact by at least 1 teacher. All classroom teachers will be providing lessons via live stream or recorded. Meetings with students and providing relationships, that's what we do best in Hayesville. We'll be building relationships with your students. The Kansas Department of Education will require a minimum of 6 hours of remote learning. So that's going to be a little bit different than the less is more that we did to end in the spring. And then again, we're going to be using Otis for consistency across the district. So our next steps, parents, we need you to enroll your kids. So if you haven't enrolled yet, please make sure that you're going to do so. Tomorrow morning, all parents will get a survey sent out, and they will determine whether your child is going to go to school on site or go to school remote. So you still need to enroll no matter what your choice is, and then please fill out the survey so we know who to expect on site and who we need to plan for remote learning. Once we gather that data, the building principals and teams will meet to develop a consistent plan for our buildings. And then we're going to make sure that we're continuing to communicate with you so you know what we know. And then, of course, we're going to roll that out with professional development days for staff so that we can be prepared to welcome your kids on September the 10th. If you have any further questions about learning and you would like to contact the administration building, here are all the numbers. Our buildings currently will not open again until August 17th with the new calendar, but here are the building numbers if you need it. And with that, I am going to stop my share and turn it over to Dr. Schutte.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it. As Dr. Burke and Jen both alluded earlier, the overriding guidelines for our reopening were developed in conjunction with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the Sedgwick County Department of Health, and the Kansas Department of Education, as well as following some of the CDC guidelines. So our focus, again, is the safety of our students, staff, and patrons, our visitors. And we're going to continue district-wide with some consistent guidelines that apply to each building. However, as principals and staffs return, they will be developing specific guidelines and procedures for their buildings based on those unique qualities for every situation. However, the biggest part of this is, again, we want to try to reduce the potential for exposure and cross contact or cross exposure for students, staff, and patrons. And so we're going to put in some district-wide guidelines. These guidelines include using our health staff as our main and primary resource. They will be our communication between the school district and Sedgwick County Department of Health. All individuals coming to schools will have their temperatures checked. When they first come in, before they're allowed to come in the building, any individuals that are showing signs of a fever will have some additional screenings before they are either sent home through communication with families or allowed to continue into the building if they're not showing signs of any exposure or potential sickness or illness. All students, staff, and visitors are going to be required to wear a mask, and we did define the mask as a covering for the nose and mouth that is secured to the head with ties. We will have this information as well on the website, so if you're specifically asking about any type of mask that you may have and want to know if it meets these qualifications, we will have this information posted there. Those masks, of course, need to be worn by all individuals within the buildings. There are some exceptions, however, and then we'll list those exceptions as well, especially for those individuals that have a medical need for which they cannot wear a mask. We will be asking for some information, including a doctor's notes or declaration of showing why they aren't able to wear a mask. If they are unable to wear a mask, we're going to ask them to wear a face shield, which we do have some of those on hand as well. If they're unable to wear a face shield, well, of course, we may have some individuals that are in a situation for which they medically cannot wear a mask or a face shield, and they will still be allowed to come and attend school. As we go forward, we're going to work on focusing on proper hygiene, because proper hygiene is one of the best ways to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. So washing hands frequently, use of hand sanitizer, social distancing wherever possible, and that's the idea within all of our buildings. 6 feet of social distancing is the ideal for all of our students and staff, and we're going to try to maintain that. But we're also going to continue to encourage students, staffs, and patrons as they visit the buildings to avoid things like touching your eyes, nose, or mouth, wash your hands frequently, cover your mouth and nose with a mask as we asked, and then we are going to spend some time disinfecting and cleaning surfaces on a more frequent basis. Our custodial and maintenance staff have been trained on CDC procedures for cleaning and disinfecting our buildings. We'll continue to review those trainings, and we'll, on a daily basis, spend quite a bit extra time cleaning and disinfecting those high-use areas. Now, we are going to make some modifications to some common spaces, and so many of the activities that we may have had in the past may change. So, for example, buildings will look at procedures for passing periods, for procedures for walking in the halls, potentially moving to one-way traffic. And the whole idea, again, is to reduce the potential for cross-contamination or exposure. And we want to limit the amount of exposure that each individual student has with other individuals. This helps with the contact tracing, and it also helps in the case of potential exposure, not having to shut down a complete building if we've limited the access individuals have to others within the building. Now, as mentioned earlier, we will be shutting off things like water fountains because those are shared areas. We will open up the water bottle fill stations, and we are installing several more water fountains within the district to allow students to have access to water on a daily basis. We are going to change the entrances for Visitors to our buildings, there will be one designated entrance for all visitors to our building where they'll have an entrance and exit. We're also going to prop open some interior doors, not exterior doors, to again reduce that touching of surfaces and the potential for cross-contamination. We, in many cases where the school district comes in contact with the public, will be using those plexiglass screens and where applicable. And in some cases, we will have additional sanitation stations available, especially in those high traffic areas. So when visitors come into our buildings, we'll have hand sanitizer, gloves, and masks available for them. We are, however, asking all individuals to bring their own mask. Now, we know that may not be possible, and we know people may lose them or forget them, so we will supply some while supplies last. But again, we're going to encourage people on a daily basis to bring and wear their own masks. We'll also continue with training and reinforcement of the proper hygiene procedures. So when students come in, we're going to go over those procedures for proper hand sanitation, how to avoid touching your face, nose, and ears for that exposure. When it comes to food service and cafeteria, we're going to continue what's been happening so far this summer, where the food service will be prepping and providing the food that is in to-go containers, even during the day. That way, as principals and staff develop plans for students to have lunch that are in non-large areas, so we need to break out into smaller groups, they'll be able to pick up their food, have it in a to-go container, and be able to go eat in smaller group areas where we can reduce that potential for cross-contamination and exposure. And then for bus transportation, we are going to provide bus transportation. Again, all riders will need to wear a mask, and if they don't have a mask when they arrive at the bus, we will have some masks available for them, again, while supplies last. And then we are going to adjust some of our routes to try to ensure that students are riding on the same bus with the same group of individuals on a daily basis. We'll be loading the bus from rear to front. When we arrive at the buildings, we will disembark from front to rear. That way we reduce that cross exposure. And of course, we're going to try to reverse that in the afternoon. So that'll mean working together with the staff and the bus drivers to ensure students are loading the buses properly. And if everybody's wearing face coverings, we really cut down on that exposure, and nightly we will clean and sanitize all of those buses so we're ready for the next day. As we go forward in building our plan, one of the things that we ask individuals and visitors to understand is we are going to limit some access to our buildings. So individuals that may have been able to visit and go to classrooms in the past, when you check in with the office now, you may not be able to go to the classroom because we want to limit the exposure to our students and staff as much as possible, and reducing visitor access to our buildings helps us do that. The Board of Education also took action last night to help us limit the exposure for outside use. So we will not be allowing outside groups to use our facilities. Only USD 261 sponsored activities will be using our facilities. Again, we really appreciate your assistance in this, and we'll turn it back over to Dr. Burke.
All right, thank you so much. One of the things that would really help us out in terms of our planning would be for you to go ahead and enroll your children in school. It's really imperative for us, if we're going to have high quality plans, that we know how many students are coming. So please go ahead and enroll. And also keep in mind that our goal is to have high quality teaching and learning in a safe environment. And together we will make that happen. Thank you.